In this tutorial, we're going to use the texture map to better understand what certain texture terms mean. So we're going to start by choosing the texture map layout over here. There we go. So now these items are organized by texture, not just roughness, but full surface texture. So here, if any items are near each other, they likely have very similar textures, and if they're stacked right on top of each other, like right here, they're likely to have essentially the same texture. So let's test that out. We can go into box select mode by clicking this button, and then we can drag a box over this column of items, and then they appear in the panel. So we can tell right away, these are probably likely to have similar textures. They're all the same brand. And it looks like they all say velour, which is a texture term. Now, that wouldn't have to be true. It wouldn't have to be true that they have the same texture term. What has to be true is that their texture images are very similar. And so let's take a look. We can click the texture image button up here. Now the background of our panel items has these texture images. And right now we're in list mode. It would probably be easier if we were in grid mode and we can see them a little better. Okay. So now we can see pretty well that these are similar textures, but just to get a better look, let's remove the text. So we can use the text length button here to change the text length. And when we click it, the text goes away. And just for reference, if you keep clicking it, you get 3 different settings. You get a minimal setting, a maximal setting, and then nothing at all. So we can see here that these are very similar textures. And it turns out actually that Gavelux velour is a very distinctive texture also. And this is probably why this column of items is sitting by itself. So, okay, this tells you a little bit about what to expect in the texture map. But now let's do a couple other things. Let's open the filter panel. Let's actually get rid of these. With the garbage can button, we can get rid of our selection. Now let's open the filter panel here. And what we want to do is we want to come to the texture section here. Now we have a couple things going on. We have a slider here, and then we have a bunch of buttons. The slider controls the filter for what level of roughness your items have. Okay, so let's say we want to look at texture terms that are on the rough side. Okay, so let's drag this slider mark to maybe around the middle of the spectrum here. And now we see, okay, a bunch of these buttons have sort of vanished, or at least have lost their color. And what's left are the things that satisfy the filter. So these are the texture terms associated with the roughest surfaces in our collection. So we have canvas, crystal, light texture woven fabric, linen, silk, and tapestry. You'll notice that, I guess apart from crystal, all of these are textile terms. Canvas, silk, linen, right? Typically when you see those terms used to describe textures, they tend to be pretty rough, okay? Now let's use this. So this arrow can expand and then contract the filter panel. So let's scoot it over there. And now we can take a look at where these points are. Okay, so it looks like there's some little clusters of pretty rough papers here, but there is some distribution here. So it's not as if the roughest papers are all in one place in the texture map. So that's kind of interesting. One thing too, to get a better look at the map, is that we can hold, on a Mac you would hold the command key, and then on a Windows computer I think it's the control key. And then you can click and drag, and that allows you to rotate the display. As you can see, this is a 3D display here. And if we rotate it a little bit, we can see some of the stuff a little bit better. And we get a better sense of what we mean when we say this is a map, right? It looks a little bit like a landscape. So here are these points. So this is sort of interesting. Okay. Now, however, it turns out that these terms, right, also have examples that are outside of this roughness range, but these terms are the only ones left in this very extreme roughness range. But one thing we might be interested in is, okay, but let's look at all canvas. So canvas is the most common term in this sort of high degree of roughness group here. So let's select just canvas, right? Okay. And so we're left with still a bunch of points. But now let's reset this slider to include all canvas prints. Okay, that added just a few more. And we can see where they are here. All right, so that's kind of interesting. We can sort of see the spread of canvas now across the texture map. Here, let's accidentally click that. Okay, so now let's remove that filter. Now we get them all back. Let's do this for some other texture terms. What about smooth? Okay, smooth, we can see, is extremely common. In fact, it's the most common texture term in our data. But it's also spread across a lot of this range. It does, though, appear, since we saw our roughest textures over kind of in this area, and most of the smooth surfaces are over to the left here, that maybe there's a little bit of a division of kind of smooth versus rough. So smooth on the left, rough on the right, something like that. Right? Okay, so that's interesting. What other terms are there? We could look at fine-grained. Okay, fine-grained must be a slightly rougher texture, and all of them are over here. And by the way, if we want to just quickly check what all of the fine-grained items look like, which is we've selected fine-grained here, we can add all of the items that satisfy the filter over to the selection panel by clicking this button, the Add Filter to Selection button. So here they are. So these are all of our fine-grained textures. And in a couple cases, we have an empty square, which means that there was no texture image available. But here, yeah, these are kind of rough, although they're a little diverse, right? They don't all look the same, but they are all kind of on the rough side, right? So this is what fine-grained looks like. Okay, let's get rid of these, and let's remove this filter. And what else do we want to look at? Let's look at just rough. How about that? Okay, yeah, they're kind of spread all over, but they tend to be on this right side. So our hypothesis is upheld, more or less. Let's add these here. Okay, rough. Now this is an interesting one. This looks like a silk. But yeah, these are pretty diverse. And rough is a pretty general term. But these are rough in all kinds of different ways. So that's kind of interesting. And that's why you see like a lot of this spread. But what about something that's more of a specific term like silk? Okay, here we go. Now if we look back at the map here. Apart from a few outliers, items labeled silk tend to all cluster up here. In fact, this is like Silk Island here, it looks like. So let's take a closer look at this with the box select mode. Let's just grab all of these, and they go to the panel. Ah, okay, so this is what silk looks like. Wow, yeah. Well, that's interesting. These are what silk textures look like. These little button shapes. This looks maybe more like a canvas, but yeah, so almost all of these. And if we add the text back in, we can see that this cuts across manufacturers, right? Airphoto, Luminos, DuPont, Agfa, Ilford, Ferrania, Ansco, Kodak, right? All of these manufacturers used this same pattern to create their silk surfaces. So this is not something unique to a manufacturer. Okay, that's interesting. Let's remove that. Now, one final thing we could do is, let's say we're interested in a few different textures. So let's say we're interested in fine grain, and rough, and silk, and smooth. Okay, now let's close the filter panel entirely. So now all of the points remaining land in one of these four texture groups. But it's a little hard to tell, right? Because we selected them, items got filtered out, and now the items that we are interested in are spread all over the map. So how can we kind of like locate them again? Well, we can color the point. Right now, the items are colored by their base color. But let's instead color them by their texture description. Ah, there we go. Okay. So now we have four colors on this map. We have this blue, which we know are the silk. We know this is Silk Island up here. This green must be smooth because it's a massive group and it occupies the entire left, so that must be smooth. And then over here we have this red color and this yellow color, and we can check here. So let's add more text back in so we can see, and let's take out the image. So now we just have a white background, and we can see that this is rough. So the orange items are rough, and we can add a few more here. Oh no, wait, sorry, that was yellow. The yellow items are rough. So yellow, 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 yellow. So we have some rough items here, and we can see, okay, right, they're all rough. We can get rid of those, and then the orange is fine grained. And we can see these here. So now if we zoom back out, we have a better sense of what those colors mean. And what we see is that rough and fine grained kind of occupy a lot of the same territory, while smooth sort of has its own giant territory, and silk up in this island. So hopefully this gives you a better sense of how some of these different features fit together to better understand what these textures mean.